Next on C-SPAN, a portion of Thursday's House debate on H.R. 4387, the Intelligence Authorization Act of 1989. Pending is an amendment by Republican Henry Hyde of Illinois that would lift the ban on CIA assistance to the Contra rebels in Nicaragua. As we go to the House floor, the Speaker is Representative Claude Pepper, a Democrat from Florida.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
The House on this amendment.
What is your request? Gentleman recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in support of the amendment, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, there are two cardinal principles I think we must keep in mind in dealing with the situation in Nicaragua. One is we must assure the Contras that we have not abandoned them. Secondly, we must let the Sandinista government know that we mean business when we say we insist that they negotiate to bring peace and democracy to Nicaragua. This amendment, in my opinion, is in furtherance of those two objectives. I shall support the amendment.
The gentleman has...
Would the gentleman from Florida yield?
Yes, indeed.
Mr. Chairman, I merely rise to compliment the gentleman from Florida for his consistent support of the situation in Nicaragua to make sure that the Contras are not eliminated from meaningful negotiations for peace in that country. And I just want him to know that it's deeply appreciated. He's very, very sincere, and what he has to say should mean a lot to all the members, and I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks at this point in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Speaker.
For what purpose
Chairman.
is the gentleman from New York?
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank the chair. Mr. Chairman, as I listen to this debate, I'm sort of surprised because something is missing. We've had on this floor amendments coming for all sorts of in all sorts of other situations dealing with what I would call the drug mania that is sweeping this body, the other body, everywhere else. And yet one of the areas where we should be having the most concern about drugs is in Central America, is with the Contras. There have been all sorts of allegations that the Contras involve themselves, or some members of the Contras, in drug trafficking in one way or another. And yet here, where we have one of the few provisions that would be able to control the things that the Contras are doing, we don't get any amendment from the other side, any mention that perhaps we shouldn't do anything until the Contras are drug-free. I mean, after all, if we're going to hold every American contractor and every American business to a very, very tough and rigorous standard, shouldn't we hold probably one of the greatest contractors of this government, of this administration, the Contras? They've received, I think, over $1 billion over the course of the years, far more than many of those affected by the gentleman from Pennsylvania's amendments would receive. Shouldn't we hold them to the same standard? And so I would plead with my colleagues from the other side of the aisle who have been so tough on drugs in the workplace, in every appropriation that has come up, to, before they rush to this amendment, which after all brings some controls on the Contras. I've always believed the problem that we have in Central America is not that the Sandinistas are so wonderful, but that the Contras are so bad. I would ask my colleagues on the other side of the aisle if they have any intention of bringing up some kind of amendment here on this proposal that would say certify the Contras are drug-free. And before we take off the little controls that we have on the Contras, as in Section 104, could we get some kind of provision that would make the Contras or attempt to make the Contras drug-free? Because after all, we all know the drugs that start out in South and Central America end up in Miami and New York and Chicago and Los Angeles. They're every bit as damaging. It's every bit as damaging to have Contra members selling drugs here, who knows with what funds, as it would be, I'd be happy to yield in 1 second, as it would be to have some worker be smoking a marijuana cigarette and having a whole factory of 10,000 people closed down. I yield to the gentleman.
I thank my friend, and I want to compliment him. He's added so much to this debate that if he needs extra time, I'll be happy to try and get it for him.
Well, I thank the gentleman, and I wonder if the gentleman is going to propose that kind of amendment today, and if not, why not?
Only if it applies to the Democratic cloakroom.
Well, I would say that is not a response worthy of the gentleman from Illinois.
He's stricken from the record, then.
What? I thank the gentleman, and we on this side are waiting for some kind of amendment that would help make the Contras as drug-free as we seek to make the rest of the American workplace.
Time of the gentleman has expired. For what purpose the gentleman from California rise? Gentleman is recognized. 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, as one of the previous spokesmen has said, serving on the Intelligence Committee does give you an opportunity for some real insights that you might not get any other way. However, this debate, I think, can be dealt with on public statements made by the participants to the process in Central America. And perhaps one of those I would like to refer to is Mauricio Diaz-Avila in his February 22nd statement upon his ouster from a National Assembly leadership position because his party was one of the 14 opposition parties engaged in the national dialogue with the government. He said that that action showed that the Sandinista party tendency to force, quote, the Assembly's political parties to either assume servile roles or be left out. He further said that the FSLN is demonstrating an enormous lack of tolerance for its opponents. This shows it is not one bit democratic and that it intends to stay in power forever. And further, he said, we have been demanding these reforms since the 1984 elections. How many victims, how many deaths could have been avoided if they had complied with what they signed in 1984? However, he refers to the Sandinistas, they are intransigent and inflexible. They prefer monologue to dialogue. That is someone who is involved in the process, who asks us and the world how many deaths could have been prevented if the Sandinistas had lived up to the promises they made in 1984. Let's get back to the central debate here, ladies and gentlemen. It's a question of peace with honor. It's a question of peace with freedom. It's a question of essential democracy that is given to the people of Central America in our own hemisphere. Dr. Julio Garcia, member of the Social Christian Party, on behalf of those 14 opposition parties, said just 10 days ago on Managua Radio, as of this date, President Ortega has not complied with the Escopales Second Agreement, particularly the points referring to, among other things, unrestricted freedom of the press and freedom of expression, full freedom of thought, and the immediate implementation of the general amnesty. Dr. Garcia went on to say in that interview on radio, we maintain that the definitive ceasefire will not last long unless there is a true democratization process in Nicaragua. There is no democracy if there is no peace, and there can be no democracy. In the context of all of this, what does Daniel Ortega say? Daniel Ortega says that if the Contras do not agree to what he has presented to them, quote, we will use all the human and material resources necessary to combat and annihilate them. Not pat them on the head, but annihilate them. We are determined to employ every means we have to annihilate and destroy those who refuse to accept this peace process and prolong the war. He has set out the terms of the debate. He has said, when you're at the bargaining table, accept our bargain or we will annihilate you. How can he say this? He can say this because there's a continued flow of Soviet support, communist country support to his side, and we have cut off any support and any threat of support from our side. If you want to look at bargaining positions as an attorney, you look and see if the people who are at the table have equal bargaining positions. In the law, we sometimes say if someone has an unequal bargaining position, the contract is invalid. Why? Because the one party can take advantage over the other party. What is the difference between that and when you have people negotiating their very lives, the peace process in Central America? And what we have is we have created an unequal bargaining position. The Sandinistas on one side have the steadfast support of the Soviets, and they can back up their threat. They can back up their threat to annihilate the Contras if the Contras don't genuflect and bow to them at the bargaining table. And what do the Contras have? They look here to Washington, and what do they see? They see us afraid to even say the President of the United States could consider, starting next November, the possibility of assistance to help in some way counterbalance what the Sandinistas are getting. We're talking about several months hence. But what have we done? We have said we're going to pick one group, one fighting force, one freedom fighter group, the Contras, out of all the rest of them in the world, and say no matter what happens, we're not going to give you the possibility of support that you need to bring an equal bargaining position to the table when you are negotiating today. And that's what we have now before us. I
The gentleman asked for one additional amendment. Is there objection? The chair hears none. The gentleman recognizes.
So I would just say this. We've had a lot of debate. Some people want to make some strong debating points about the drug issue. Some people want to say we're trying to further the killing. And the people who are down there negotiating on the part of the opposition parties are telling us the killing has been prolonged because of the intransigence of the Sandinistas. They're asking for support from us. It is the humane thing for us to do to support the Hyde Amendment. It is the humane thing because it gives hope to the people who wish to have an opportunity for democracy. We owe them at least that much. I would rather give them that much than tell them I'm going to send my 14-year-old son down to Central America 5 years from now when this policy fails. And that's what you're doing. You're putting those of us who have children at risk of sending our sons down there in Central America in 5 years because we don't have the guts to give the Sandinistas a reasonable threat on the part of the Contras at the bargaining table.
Time of the gentleman expired. The chair is prepared to put the question. Are other members seeking recognition? For what purpose is the gentlelady from California?
Well, if you're ready to put the question up. Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, when I came here nearly a year ago, this was the first vote I made on the floor, the vote for the intelligence authorization. A lot has happened in the peace process in that time. President Arias was recognized as a Nobel Peace Prize winner for his efforts for peace in Central America. We've had the Sopoa Agreement, and indeed, even today, talks will be resumed in Managua. But not much progress has been made on the other side of the aisle in terms of peace in Central America. This Hyde Amendment is the same old thing. I see no growth, no responding to changing circumstances in Central America, no response to the wishes of the people of Central America, no response to the wishes of the people of the United States. A few years ago, I visited Central America, and I resolved, and that's one of the reasons I worked hard to come to Congress, to do whatever I could in my power to stop the suffering there. My colleague addressed the issue of his 14-year-old son 5 years from now. I'd like to address the issue of 14-year-old children fighting this illegal war in Central America just because it happens to be a policy preference of our colleagues in the House on the other side of the aisle. We have heard much talk about peace today, but the fact is that if we want peace, we should heed the words of Pope Paul VI, who said, if you want peace, work for justice. If we want peace, we should eliminate the embargo in Central America and give the Nicaraguan country its own chance at peace. We should reject the Hyde Amendment for these children. Sandinista children, they're not Sandinista children, they're Nicaraguan children, children of Contras, children of Sandinistas, children of Nicaragua. 15 and 16-year-old boys losing their lives and their limbs because of the misguided policies of this Reagan administration. End the suffering for the young children, the babies born in camps, because there's no self-determination in Nicaragua, again because of the misguided policies of this administration. The Hyde Amendment we've heard characterized by some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and I would say that we should recognize it for what it is. The Hyde Amendment is in increasing the militarization of the area. It is not in support of peace in Central America. It would remove any restriction on the use of the CIA in Nicaragua. It would dump the bipartisan support for the peace process. It would put the House on record for more war in Nicaragua, more suffering and more dying and more killing of children in Central America on the same day, on the very same day that the Contras and the Sandinistas are talking about peace. Hyde Amendment would say no to the Central American peace process. It would reopen the Contra war to the full extent of the CIA contingency fund, and it would end congressional participation in making peace, not war, in Central America.
Will the gentlelady yield to me? Will the gentlelady yield to me?
I yield to my colleague, yes.
I want to compliment my colleague from San Francisco on her excellent remarks, associate myself with those remarks. I'm proud to serve with her and represent that city. I would like to say that you're right. It is the same old thing. We've seen those planes go down with weapons and come back with drugs. We don't want that same old thing. We don't want to see the same people who brought us General Noriega, and I don't know where you people have been. He's looking at America with a sword over his head, and we're going to take the same old people and put them in charge of our Nicaragua policy. Vote no on that policy. Vote no on the Hyde Amendment.
Do I have more time? I would like to say that I would like to see some response of this Congress to the efforts being made by the people of Nicaragua for their own peace. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr.
The time of the gentlelady has expired. The chair, for what purpose did the gentleman from Oklahoma rise?
Strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes. Without objection.
This is almost surreal. I feel as though we have been frozen in time. You know, I have to say that while we disagreed, I cannot really find fault with those people who placed their hope in a peace process. We all have times when we are guided by our dreams and by our hopes. But this is not the week of the unveiling of the Arias peace plan. This is not the week of the signing of the agreement at Escopolis. This is not the week of the signing of the agreement at Sopoa. This is the week the talks come to an end with no agreement, because the Sandinistas have said to President Arias, said to Jim Wright, and said to you, you can take your plan and your list of reforms and your democratic process and shove it. And then we hear this debate. And this place becomes like a twilight zone. It's as though none of the past 6 months had even happened, as though none of the articles had appeared, none of the trips to Central America had been made, none of the speeches by Ortega had been made. It's as though Major Miranda had not defected and told us of the Sandinistas' military plans. It's as though the Sandinistas had not moved their troops into Honduras. It's as though the Sandinistas were not threatening and preparing a new military offensive. It's as though newsprint had not been withheld from newspapers, as though labor leaders had not been thrown into jail, as though journalists had not been beaten, as though peaceful demonstrations had not been broken up, as though the Ministry of Justice had not been closed and its functions turned over to the state police. You know, you can ignore the fact that you voted for food, but it was not delivered. You can ignore the fact that Daniel Ortega and the Sandinistas are laughing at you, but you cannot ignore the fact that you are destroying the last hope of freedom and democracy for millions of Nicaraguans. Nicaraguans may have dark skin and they may speak a foreign language, but they have every bit as much right to a free press and free elections and free speech as you have. To have not voted against Contra aid months ago with what you knew then is understandable, but to vote against this amendment is absolutely indefensible. I'd be glad to yield.
I'm wondering if the gentleman would present to us the evidence that he apparently has that indicates that talks are breaking off, that there is somehow a conclusion that we haven't heard about. Oh, I think most of us heard the Sandinistas were willing to extend the ceasefire another 30 days, and the talks continue today in Managua. What evidence is there that we have reached the end of our rope? Is there some information that you have that is not publicly available?
Oh, I think it's very publicly available. I'll say to the gentleman from California, if he reads the papers, if he talks to the Contras, if he listens to what the Sandinistas are saying, the Sandinistas are willing, of course, to be able to continue the sham while the Contras run out of food, while they have no ammunition, and to keep the pressure on. But these talks, you know and I know, are not going to go anywhere unless the Sandinistas are willing to provide some of the democracy that not only the Contras have been willing to fight and die for, but that this Congress, in the Byron Chandler resolution, said we insisted upon.
Gentleman, go ahead, Dave.
Gentleman, yield for a second.
Glad to yield.
With all due respect to my friend from Oklahoma, that is not what the Contras told us. The directorate, who appeared before the Democratic leadership just 2 days ago, they have a plan. They're in agreement on the Pan American Development Foundation for delivery of food, as are the Nicaraguan government. They're meeting seriously now in Managua with the rights to visit the church, the right to visit La Prensa, the right to visit friends, the rights to associate with political parties while they're in Managua. Why would you want to do this today when it took 3 weeks to put together the whole Contra thing when it fell apart? Now they've got some semblance of order. When it took us 8 months to put together a bipartisan package, why in God's name would you want to come to this floor today and propose this thing that has the effect of blowing it all up?
3 weeks to put it together? Isn't this the same gentleman from Michigan with whom I have been engaged in dialogue over this for 2 years, trying to get it put together? Do you still believe today, after everything that's happened, that the Sandinistas are going to bring democracy to Nicaragua? Do you believe that?
Yes, I do.
Then it's absolutely amazing. You ought to subscribe to the newspapers.
The time of the gentleman expired. For what purpose did the gentleman from Oregon arise?
What's the number of words?
Gentleman recognized for 5 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
I would say to the gentleman from Oklahoma and his supporters that I don't believe for a moment that the Contras will restore democracy or freedom to Nicaragua. And I can't understand anyone believing in such a preposterous position. Let me tell you something about the Contras. And I go back long enough to remember when Bill Casey told me and other members of the Congress that the purpose of this whole covert exercise was to stop arms being sent into El Salvador. Under our questions, they could never point out to a single catch of a significant number of arms sent from Nicaragua into El Salvador. So we moved along to another rationalization. And what we've seen is one rationalization after another, each one shot down. And now finally, no, I'm not going to yield just yet. I'll try to yield to the gentleman from Illinois in a moment. He never yields to me, but I'll try to yield to him in a moment. We've seen one justification after another, shot down in flames, and each time we finally get closer to the truth. The truth is that under the guise of the words freedom and democracy, we are expected to believe that Contras, who have made as their target of choice not regular Sandinista troops, but rather civilians and women and children in co-ops around the countryside of Nicaragua, are somehow the spiritual descendants of Thomas Jefferson. That is absolutely preposterous. Benjamin Linder from Portland, Oregon, a constituent of mine, was shot, and all the evidence suggests, shot at point-blank range in the temple in all probability by Contras, and we cannot find the answers. We cannot get a full identification or a full report from the CIA even today, after 2 years of trying. The State Department won't cooperate with us either. These are the spiritual descendants of Thomas Jefferson. Give me a break. Right now, in Managua, we have peace talks, ceasefire talks going on. And your side, which says that you're sorry to the chairman that you've had to bring this amendment to the floor without giving him notice, you bring it to a floor on the day when both sides are talking, when there is a chance for an agreement. Your problem is, when you see the situation down in Nicaragua, you feel that the only way you can solve the problem is to give ammunition to not freedom fighters, but mercenaries. Mercenaries who are indiscriminate in their choices of targets. I've got a dead constituent to prove that. Mercenaries who don't stand for democracy. They can't even account for where we've sent the funds. There are hundreds of thousands of dollars in Cayman Island bank accounts that are unaccounted for today. These are the spiritual descendants of Thomas Jefferson. I'm not going to yield at this point. I'm going to finish my remarks as the gentleman did. These are not the spiritual descendants of Thomas Jefferson. These are not freedom fighters. These are mercenaries.
Will the gentleman yield?
They're not going to bring democracy to Nicaragua.
I wouldn't yield either.
They're not going to bring democracy to Nicaragua. And if your litmus test on Nicaragua is freedom of the press, full participation in society, why don't you fund Contras in South Africa, where none of those freedoms exist? You're silent on those questions. We'll have sanctions on the question of that country, and you're silent on that. Your dual standard is absolutely unbelievable to this member of Congress.
Now will the gentleman yield?
Defeat the Hyde Amendment. It is untimely. It is guerrilla warfare on the House floor. It'll reintroduce the war in Nicaragua, and I think we have a chance to solve it by peaceful means.
Now will the gentleman yield?
This is a preposterous amendment.
Now will the gentleman yield?
The time of the gentleman.
My time has expired.
The time of the gentleman from Oregon has expired.
I ask unanimous consent the gentleman have 1 additional minute for the purpose of yielding to me.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 additional amendment. Without objection.
Now will the gentleman yield?
Certainly I'll yield to the gentleman.
I direct my friend from Oregon to a series of reports from the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, which recites how much arms are being shipped into El Salvador from Nicaragua. When Mr. Boland was the chairman, I'll even get them and hand carry them to the gentleman's office.
I'll reclaim my time.
In addition,
I'll reclaim my time at this point.
Oh, now I got the gentleman some time.
I understand the gentleman's point. I'm going to reclaim my time. I want to tell the gentleman. I sit on the Defense Appropriations Committee. I've had the secret briefings as well. And I understand what the facts are as well as the gentleman does. Drug interdictions was a sham. And I think the Chutzpah Award ought to be given to the gentleman from Illinois. Arias got the Nobel Prize. You ought to get the Chutzpah Prize. Because here we have as the reward for people who went through the back door using illegal means, shredding documents in the basement of the White House. As their reward, the gentleman from Illinois says we ought to pass an amendment to turn loose the CIA. It's ridiculous. Defeat the Hyde Amendment.
Now, for what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek a recognition? Without objection, the gentleman recognized for 5 minutes.
I'd like to point out for the record, certainly not to instruct my friend from Oregon, that the House Committee on Intelligence reports certify the traffic in arms from Nicaragua to El Salvador, and if he'd ever read those reports, which are public records, not classified, he would know better. Secondly, America does contribute money for democracy in South Africa. Millions of dollars go over there to democratic institutions. So again, the gentleman is misinformed. Thank you for yielding.
Appreciate the gentleman's contribution, and I really don't want to talk to the people on this side who are already entrenched. What this debate comes down to is whether we can get the people in the middle of this debate who have been on the edge of this thing for the last several years. I want to tell you, first of all, I oppose the administration, the suggestions, the talk that talked about delivering military aid about 1.5 years ago. I said I thought that was the wrong signal to send. And then I supported the bipartisan policy, and in fact I chastised people on both sides who tried to politicize the debate when we had the bipartisan policy that passed through this House several months ago. But you know what? To those who are in the middle, you got to look at the facts and you have to look at the truth, and you can't ignore it anymore because the program isn't working. If you look at the statement that Mickey Edwards, the letter that Mickey Edwards wrote to President Arias, La Prensa, the great press in Nicaragua, censored, threatened, twice closed, journalists within Nicaragua, one of the most respected television journalists in the country, beaten on his doorstep as a result of his reports, labor leaders and leaders of the internal democratic opposition arrested, thrown in jail, the Ministry of Justice closed down. Most of the government-sponsored hooligans have gone and disrupted and abused those people who dare protest against the government. And ladies and gentlemen, on the front page of the New York Times yesterday was the article about the Sandinistas preparing attacks. And we used the aerial photography, and we discovered some basic things. They are building up ammunition, explosives. They got more than what they can even put in their warehouses. Photographs indicating movements and buildups on the Honduran border, in fact, even extending an airport on the Honduran border. I mean, this has all been happening, ladies and gentlemen, since we tried this bipartisan plan. I don't want to talk to those who are entrenched. I want to talk to those people in this House who do not like the Sandinistas, who want peace, and who are trying to be objective. My friend from Delaware, my friend from Kansas, who have been on the edge of these votes for vote after vote after vote. What do we do here? What we say is if the Sandinistas will not comply, which clearly they have not been doing, to my good friends in the middle, if they will not comply next year, we ought to give our government the opportunity to support these people. And let me tell you, I don't care who you want to quote. If you want to talk about Luis Sancho, you know what he says? And this is what the Contras will tell you. He's a leader in the Nicaraguan Socialist Party. Listen to this. The Sandinistas see the Contras falling apart, and they see the United States not disposed to help them. They feel they now control the situation, which means there's no reason to compromise on anything. Ladies and gentlemen, we met the Contras a couple days ago, and you know what they told us? They may not survive for 2 or 3 more months. If you want the Contras to survive within Nicaragua, if you want the peace talks to be successful, if you want to be in a position of where you don't wipe out the opposition to the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, you've got to support this amendment, because this amendment sends a signal that the Contras desperately need. I wish you all had a chance to see these people, and what they will tell you is one basic thing. Our people are starving, our units are falling apart, the Sandinistas know it, and the timetable is their ally. And if you will remember the debates that we've had for the last couple years, we have asked you, we have pleaded with you not to let the calendar be an ally of the communists. And that is exactly what they are doing. Don't let the Contras starve to death. For those in the middle that want to keep the process going, give us an option down the road. Let's not eliminate any possibility we have to call the Sandinistas on the carpets for all of these violations. I plead with you and I beg with you, in that bipartisan spirit that we had in this House several months ago, support that Hyde amendment, really give peace a chance, and don't put your head in the sand to wake up one day and find out that the Contras exist no more, that the Sandinistas have consolidated, and there is no hope for the future in Nicaragua. And I would be glad to yield to the gentleman from California, Mr.
The gentleman has expired. The chair is ready to put the question. If there are no other members seeking recognition, we have consumed nearly 3 hours on this amendment. There are other amendments pending. If we have any chance of concluding our business today, we must move on. The chair will recognize those who seek recognition, but I would hope that the leadership would help us reach some kind of agreement how we proceed. For what purpose is the gentleman from Delaware rise? All right, the gentleman is recognized for 5
I will be
minutes.
brief. At the very best, the amendment before us is premature. At the very worst, this amendment is a step back, not a step forward. I'd ask you to consider the following for just a moment. What has been the policy of our country, at least in the 6 years that I've been a member of this body? The policy of our country has been to bring pressure to bear on the Sandinista regime to compel them to live up to the original promises of their revolution: a more open society and a mixed or pluralist economy. We have brought strong pressure indeed. Economic pressure, military pressure, and diplomatic pressure. For years, the Sandinistas said to me and to others in this body and to anyone who would listen, "Uncle, Uncle." They expressed repeatedly their desire to negotiate with us toward a solution involving both peace and democracy. Finally, at long last, somebody decided to call their bluff. Somebody decided to test the sincerity of the Sandinistas. We test that sincerity. We put them under the glare of the spotlight with the agreement worked out at Escopolis. Our pressure compelled the Sandinistas to sign that agreement as well. We are now testing, even today as we speak, that sincerity in further talks between the Contras and the Sandinistas. Those talks should go forward. Let me return closer to home right here. For 6 years, I have witnessed partisan bickering and sniping on this issue, this foreign policy issue, which almost alone we're able to reach any kind of bipartisan accord on, until 1 or 2 months ago, when finally we agreed on a policy. What was that policy? The policy says we are going to provide the sustenance to sustain the Contras for 6 months, and beyond that if necessary, in order to permit them to try to reach a negotiated settlement with the Sandinistas to bring both peace and democratic reforms.
Gentleman yield.
If the gentleman will just permit me to proceed for 1 moment. It's been pointed out that the progress in those talks has been slow. Well, let me just say that progress in the talks to negotiate the withdrawal of the Soviet troops from Afghanistan has been slow as well. It didn't happen in a day, it did not happen in a week, it did not happen in 1 month. Similarly, the negotiations for the INF Treaty did not take place in a day, a week, or a month. These things do not go by quickly. Further, there is plenty of blame to go around to both sides on this issue. Both sides. Neither side is without sin. Finally, let me just say, I wish all the energy that we're consuming today in this debate could somehow be turned to the following subject. We have enormous security concerns. I thank the
gentleman from Delaware.
We have enormous security concerns in Central America. I want to see, and I think you want to see, we all want to see, the assurance that no foreign military bases will be established in Nicaragua. We want to see the size of the military there reduced, not increased. We want to see the foreign military advisors thrown out of that country. Our president 1 year ago said, let's enter into multilateral talks with all the Central American countries on those national security interests. And let's do so as soon as the Contras and as soon as the Sandinistas begin to talk. They are talking. The time has come for us to follow through on that word, and I yield to the gentleman from Washington.
I compliment the gentleman for his leadership in his speech. The leadership this House has given for 4 months is working. There's a real chance we're going to have something everybody be for. We had bipartisan support of what got us here. Let's defeat the Hyde Amendment and give what the leadership this House has given a chance to work. I ask unanimous consent, revise and extend my remarks.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Without objection. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio rise?
Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that all debate on this amendment and all amendments thereto conclude in 36 minutes, the time to be accorded equally to each side.
Is there objection?
No objection to that.
All right. The request is accepted, and the time limitation is now 36 minutes. Now, for what purpose is the gentleman from Washington to seek a recognition? Or
recognize you.
Mr.
Chair now will recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Stokes, for 18 minutes, and the chair will recognize the gentleman from Illinois for 18 minutes. All right, the gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Obey.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I simply want to make one practical point. After many years of arguing and partisan bickering, we have been able in the last 2 months to establish a very tenuous bipartisan consensus in many areas of foreign policy. We did that on the Contra agreement, which was reached just a few weeks ago on the floor of this House, and we did that again yesterday on the foreign aid bill after 7 years of very hard fighting. I would suggest that nothing would be more damaging to the national interest of the United States than to, one day after that bipartisan support was demonstrated on the bill we had dealt with just yesterday, to, without any notice whatsoever, in the middle of negotiations taking place in Nicaragua right now, to adopt the amendment that is now before us. Good public policy is not served by surprise amendments which only have the effect of sandbagging the negotiations that are going on. I have no idea whether those negotiations will prove fruitful or not, and as I've indicated many times before, I wouldn't trust either side in the Contra-Sandinista debate as far as I could throw either one of them. I've been lied to so much by both sides that I don't believe anybody on that score anymore. But I'd suggest to you that this amendment deletes all restrictions on the CIA activity in that part of the world. It would allow a resurrection of the war. It would be the worst possible thing we could do at the worst possible time if we are interested in seeking peace. We should not be in the business right now of each individually predicting what we think the outcome of those negotiations is going to be. We ought to be in the process of trying to give those negotiations every possible opportunity to succeed, and we should not set up the United States as an easy target for the Sandinistas to blame if those negotiations fall apart. Passage of this amendment gives the Sandinistas an easy excuse, an easy out. It gives them an easy reason to walk away from negotiations or to be even more obstreperous in negotiations than they usually are. I cannot think of anything that would be dumber for us to do at this moment. If those negotiations do finally break down, let it be Nicaragua that does it. Let it not be the United States Congress.
Wisconsin has expired. Gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Hyde.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from Connecticut, Mrs. Johnson.
The lady from Connecticut is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the Hyde Amendment. Whenever we discuss this issue in the House floor, we tend to fall into rhetoric that is divisive and polarizing. The real issue here is how do we achieve the goals of the Arias peace plan, the twin goals of peace and democratization. The negotiations that some of my colleagues have referred to, the negotiations about the ceasefire that have not progressed very well and that still have a few weeks remaining, may succeed. But they only address the issue of the ceasefire. They do not address the parallel issue of democratization. And on the record of democratization, and I won't repeat the record because many of my colleagues here have spelled it out in great detail, and it is in fact detailed in this State Department publication, The Sandinista Action since Equipulas, August 7th, 1987, which I intend to submit for the record. But the record on the democratization actions is indeed very bad. They have gone backwards, not forwards. So the issue is, how do we restore the forward process? The Hyde Amendment is in the tradition of those actions taken that have, in our experience, in fact, promoted negotiations. The members will recall that the Democrats of this House sent a delegation down to the meeting of the presidents in January, and only when House Democrats said to Ortega, unless you negotiate, you will face renewed military aid, did negotiations proceed. Did Ortega take a new step and agree to the negotiations that led to the Sopoa Agreement? Our point is now from this side to again restore the kind of pressure that the Democrats in this House found necessary to bring to bear in order to get the negotiations in place that brought into being the Sopoa Agreement. That Sopoa Agreement has not worked to create forward process on the democratization issues which underlie the peace issues. So we are trying to again restore comparable pressure, the same kind of pressure you restored in January to get Sopoa. We are trying now to restore to the current process so that in the next few weeks there will be some progress on the ceasefire, but also on the democratization issues that fundamentally underlie and are essential to peace in Central America. So what we're trying to do here is limited. It only restores aid as of October, or allows that possibility with no new money. We have plenty of time. You know this body. If we see that aid is going to run and we want to condition it, we can do it. But it sends a strong signal. It sends exactly the kind of signal you found necessary to send in January to create forward motion and new commitment. The Sandinistas have an abominable record on the democracy commitments that they themselves made in Sopoa, and only this amendment will restore their interest.
Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Stokes.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Stenholm.
Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Stenholm, is recognized for 2 minutes. Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of this amendment. This amendment does not, in my judgment, hinder the peace talks going on at this very moment. It strengthens the peace talks. This amendment does nothing until October 1. This amendment allows a strategy of peace through strength to occur. And that's what all of us have wanted, peace. Many of us are divided about the proper way to accomplish it. 27 of us on my side of the aisle sent a letter to President Ortega 2 weeks ago, of which he took as being a threat from members of Congress to him, but it wasn't meant to be a threat. Mr. Speaker, that letter was meant to be a response to his threat, in which he publicly, not once, not twice, but 3 times, which have been reported on the media, threatened to annihilate these Contras the day after the peace talks break down. Now, my colleagues, this is a difficult time. None of us have the simple answer to this, and I quarrel not with most of the factual statements that have been made on this floor today. What we are talking about is a proper strategy for America to help the peace process work. And I suggest that we forget the partisan rhetoric that we have heard today and concentrate strictly on the peace process, and to see if there is not some little question in the back of our minds that providing doubt in the Sandinistas of what might happen on October the 1st if they do not live up to the peace accords, because we have already told the Contras what this Congress will do to them. Let's be fair to both sides, and let's give peace a chance. Support this amendment strongly.
The gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Hyde.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Goodling.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Goodling, is recognized for 3 minutes. Without objection, so ordered.
Before I get to the total part of this amendment, I'd like to refer to a couple things that were mentioned thus far. Number one, it seemed that some were trying to draw a parallel between the 30s and the 80s, and I suppose that was to be drawn between Chamberlain and Reagan, and I'd like to say that Mr. Chamberlain was not an appeaser. He had no choice France, England, and the United States collectively could not have fought their way out of a paper bag at that particular time. That doesn't happen at this particular time. Secondly, I hear time and time again that we were told in the Intelligence Committee over and over again that the whole purpose was to interdict arms. That is nonsense. That was number 2 on the list. Number 1 on the list every time when Mr. former CIA director came before us was that he wanted to cause the Sandinistas to turn inwardly, to look inwardly, and we seem to forget that. He did it all the time. I left the committee for 2 reasons, because, as you know, I was not a supporter of the effort. I left the committee because I thought the administration had enough opposition on that committee without having somebody on their side. However, the Ortega brothers have convinced me that I should take them for what they are and what they believe. They're making a believer out of me. I supported the $75 million that Carter wanted. I supported the $100 million that went in, as a matter of fact, because I wanted to do something differently than we did with Cuba. It didn't work. And I'm here to say today that unless we have a stick, I am thoroughly convinced at this point that it is not going to work. There will not be a peaceful settlement. And whether this is the right stick or not, I don't know. But the beauty of this stick is that it doesn't get used till October. So as a matter of fact, you have many months to bring about this entire peace process. The stick is there, and every time we've taken the stick away, they've made a fool out of my previous speaker, they've made a fool out of this speaker, they've made a fool out of this person who's standing in the well. And so I think if we can't get a bipartisan stick quickly, it's going to be too late. So my hope is that, as a matter of fact, this will be the stick that'll bring about what all of us want, and that's a peaceful resolution. But without a stick, I'm no longer going to be naive enough to believe that it can happen.
The gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Stokes.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Lowry.
Gentleman from Washington, Mr. Lowry, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ask unanimous consent to revise.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding. Congratulations to the committee for bringing the bill to the floor. I just do not understand why today we want to take a chance in interfering with the tremendous opportunity that's going on in Nicaragua and Managua right now. March 30th, this House, to its credit, by a broad bipartisan effort, as a matter of fact, 166 to 5 on the Republican side, passed a tremendous effort to support the Nicaraguan people's chance for them to accomplish peace. Now, the parts of that package are moving forward. 2 days ago, the Contra leadership here in a press conference, as most of us know, say that they will accept and look forward to the delivery of food, clothing, and medical supplies by the Pan American Development Foundation. And the previous week, the Nicaraguan government had said the same thing. And so that element called for within that bipartisan package that passed here March 30th was being met. Last week, at long last, but it's now been done, the Independent Verification Commission by the Organization of American States, that bipartisan movement that was so successful on this floor was funded. And we now have the Organization of American States Independent Verification Commission, as called for by the package that passed the House, to support the chances of peace in Nicaragua going forward. There's been about $13 million, I believe, 12 or $13 million of the children's health aid package has been sent forward to the private organizations by which to work on the health problems of the victims of that terrible war that we're all for stopping down there. That has been sent forward. It is moving forward. It's a tremendous success. Let us not today take a chance in interfering with the Nicaraguans people to obtain the negotiated peace that we all support. I think the last 4 months' action in this House by a bipartisan means to really move forward has been a tremendous success for this House. I compliment the House on that, and let's not put that all aside today and lose that. Let us defeat the Hyde Amendment. I thank the chairman very much for the time.
The gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Hyde.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Dornan.
From California, Mr. Dornan is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, colleagues, I don't think any more eloquent words will be spoken in this well than were spoken by the gentleman from Pennsylvania on our side, Mr. Goodling. He admitted that the Ortega brothers, a communist team of people who rule with a gun and terror and nighttime arrests and private executions, he also said that you have been made a fool out of, Mr. Speaker. You, Jim Wright, who received one of these communist thugs in your office supplied by the taxpayers on Veterans Day of last year, you have been made a fool out of. And yet in that meeting that Mr. Cheney referred to in written comments after a meeting with the press the other day, the meeting on the eve of March 16th, I came into the back of that room. No one said it wasn't open. Bob McEwen of Ohio and myself. And we heard you, Mr. Speaker, refer to the Contras as our people down there. You said this right to the face of our Secretary of State, Mr. Schultz. Our people. Well, not everybody in this chamber believes that the Contras are our people. Certainly not a couple of gentlemen from New York, not Mr. Coyne of Oregon. They think they truly are mercenaries and thugs. Some of us believe, most of us I hope, that the Cubans are the mercenaries, the East Germans, the Bulgarians, Nicaraguan young men and women from the fincas, the small coffee and cotton farms and the destroyed cattle ranches. They are Nicaraguans fighting for freedom on Nicaraguan soil. Hardly anybody's definition of a mercenary. Let me clean up some things before I refer to these newest released pictures of the prison camps. Very clear in detail, the clearest ever released, and every member is invited to a top secret briefing by any of our intelligence agencies, DIA, CIA particularly, to see these 3 times closer. The International Red Cross, the ICRC, has been so compromised after the execution of hundreds of young Guardia soldiers that they turned over to the Sandinista communists in '79 after promising to give them sanctuary. They are so compromised by that deed and by their acceptance of communist figures that there's barely over 3,400 prisoners, and telling me to my face, Louis Rogemont in New York, that the Red Cross would bet me $50 that these are military installations when they're prisons with 3 rows of concertina, barbed wire, and gun towers. There's over 8,000 prisoners still in prison, most of them for so-called political crimes against the communist government. Just a little cleanup before this. Mr. Coyne mentioned Benjamin Linder. Benjamin Linder was in uniform, carrying a Russian assault rifle, was killed in a firefight, and the communists who lied 5 times in 5 major disinformation stories over a 5-day period, they are the ones who put the coup de grace into his corpse. The lying communists shot him in the head after he'd been dead 5 days. No one's been allowed to see his body. Not his parents or American doctors. And then they floated that story, and nobody of good sense really could believe that. Mr. Schumer talks about drugs. Are we going to make the workplace free of drugs for the Sandinista communists? We have film taken from the tail of a C-47 running drugs with people from the Mint, the Ministry of Interior, or Humberto, or not Ortega's gang, Tomas Borges' gang, out there loading drugs on an airplane. That's where the drug running took place.
Chair would state that the gentleman from Illinois has 9 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Ohio has 11 minutes remaining. Chairman, I recognize the distinguished gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Stokes.
Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gonzalez.
From Texas, Mr. Gonzalez is recognized for 2 minutes.
Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to this amendment. I can't think of a more mischievous, counterproductive to the national interest bit of legislation than this proposed amendment. Let us make no mistakes as to the net end results of this amendment if it is enacted by the Congress. The so-called exertion of pressure on the Sandinistas will mean the further murdering and raping on the part of those that the President, in an excess of verbiage, calls freedom fighters, perpetrated against innocent men, women, children, school teachers, and American social workers. On top of that, our country has been disgraced in the tribunals of international justice. We stand condemned because of CIA activity in Nicaragua of acts of terrorism. We not only stand in condemned judgment, but we have been fined by the World Court of Justice, the International Tribunal of Justice, because of the thing that this amendment would seek to bring about a restoration. I say, for the sake of our own honor, the well-being of the future interest of the nation, we turned this amendment down overwhelmingly.
The gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Hyde.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Dan Burton.
Gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Burton, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank the gentleman for yielding. They are communists. They are committed to expanding their revolution throughout Central America, and they're being heavily supported by the Soviet Union. They received over $200 million in aid, I think, since the first of the year, while we haven't even been able to get $17 million in humanitarian assistance in to help the freedom fighters. The point's been made earlier today that an agreement has been reached between the freedom fighters and the communists down there that the Pan American Development Corporation will take the food in. That agreement has been reached, but it will not be implemented until certain other conditions are met. For instance, the Sandinistas are arguing about the 7th ceasefire zone and, more importantly, what's going to happen inside those zones. Until this is resolved, they will not let the food in. And they're going to drag this peace process out as long as they can to starve the freedom fighters, the Contras, into submission. That is a fact. That's why they want to extend this ceasefire another 30 days. And we're playing right into their hands by not doing anything about it. Not one penny of the $17 million allocated by the U.S. Congress on April 1st for humanitarian assistance has been given to the freedom fighters inside Nicaragua. They are starving to death. Are we going to wait until they're no longer a viable force before we do something? I hope not. That's why I think the Hyde Amendment should be passed, and passed rather rapidly today. When the U.S. Agency for International Development tried to send some bananas to the refugee camps in Nicaragua, the Congress forced the Price Waterhouse accounting firm to count each banana and run them through a metal detector to make sure they contain no weapons. That's the kind of aid we're getting in. They're counting bananas to keep weapons from getting into the Contras. It's a terrible, terrible thing that's going on right now. What's even more absurd is one of the senators in the other body from Hawaii ordered a GAO study to see if the sending of food to the refugee camps in Honduras was illegal. At the same time, we're sending rice and beans to refugee camps. The Soviets have already shipped over $200 million worth of military aid in the first quarter of this year alone. And right here in my hand, I have 7 pages of violations of the Sopoa Agreement. As the gentleman, Mr. Kemp from New York, said earlier today, they have not complied with the agreements that they signed in 1979. At Escopolis, at Sopoa, they violated everything. And yet we continue to support them by going along with this peace process. It's not a peace process. It's a process for capitulation. Daniel Ortega said just recently, and I think it bears repeating here today, he said the Contras are defeated criminals who deserve the guillotine. He went on to say their demands that the Sandinista front relinquish control of the army and police would never be accepted. He later said, changes in Nicaragua's revolutionary path are not on the table in the peace negotiations.
Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Stokes.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. Kennelly, a member of the Intelligence Committee.
Recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, as a new member of the Intelligence Committee, I had not planned on speaking today. This bill was marked up with deliberation, with quiet professionalism, the staff working with the members in a bipartisan fashion, listening to the advice of the Counterintelligence Agency, the Defense Department, and the State Department. With the introduction of this amendment, we have opened up the whole Contra question again, a question that's been debated time and time on this floor, hundreds of hours of members' time involved. That's all well and good if it makes people feel better, but right now the Contras and the Sandinistas are attempting to bring peace to their own area, and since we have been very successful, we should allow them to do that. I would suggest that we just defeat this amendment and return to the bill, which is a good bill, the kind of bill that we should have with the Intelligence Committee, and vote for it. And this debate obviously will come up again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Time, the gentlelady has expired. Gentleman from Illinois has 6 minutes remaining.
I thank the chairman, and I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Kyle.
Gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Kyle, is recognized for 3 minutes. Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. This is the right amendment, the right policy statement at the right time. As our Rules Committee Chairman, Mr. Pepper, said, we need to do something now. We need to show, first of all, that we have not abandoned the Contras, and secondly, we need to show that the United States means business in pursuit of our, hopefully, a solution to the problem. Military aid is obviously not an option at this time. All this amendment does is to bring policy toward Nicaragua into conformance with our policy everywhere else in the world as of next October. But it will still send a message, and that's the point. The real question I have is, why should this amendment be opposed? Mr. Speaker, I wonder if I might have order.
The gentleman is entitled to be heard. The committee will be in order. Members, please take seats and cease conversation.
Mr. Chairman, the question I pose is, why would this amendment be opposed? First of all, it will not really go into effect until October, so it does not disrupt negotiations, and it can very well provide an incentive to the Sandinistas to negotiate and to comply with what they've already promised. Secondly, it doesn't provide new aid to the Contras. No additional aid could even be given until after next October. Third, it conforms U.S. policy in Nicaragua with respect to intelligence activity to that policy which exists everywhere else in the world, in the Soviet Union and Cuba and everywhere else which we conduct a foreign policy. In short, for those who have opposed aid to the Contras, but who believe that the Sandinistas have not yet complied with the agreements to which they have been committed, that they have not yet made sufficient progress toward democracy in Nicaragua. For those who believe those two things, this amendment provides a very good answer and a very good vote. It is the right vote for this point in time. Now, already alluded to has been the State Department chronology of page after page after page of Sandinista violations of the agreements that they have promised to comply with so far. A really sorry state of affairs in Nicaragua today. If you believe that the Sandinistas have not lived up to their agreements, as these documents and the news stories in the New York Times and the Washington Post have confirmed, then we'd ought to do something to try to provide that incentive, to send the message. And as Mr. Pepper said, this is the right thing to do, because while it is not aid to the Contras today, it is the establishment of a policy as of next October that would permit us to begin to do some things that we do in other parts of the world. And therefore, I say that to provide or to promote democracy as well as peace, this is the amendment to support. And I would urge all of my colleagues, those who have not supported aid to the Contras in the past, to please consider this as the moderate position, the amendment that can be supported to bring that pressure to bear in the appropriate way. And I thank you.
Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Stokes.
I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Richardson, a member of the committee.
Mr. Richardson, recognized for 1 minute.
And extend my
Without objection, so ordered.
There are 6 reasons why we should not support this amendment, which perhaps may be opportune later if there is generally a stalemate in the negotiations. Let me just review what this amendment would do. It would remove any restrictions on the use of the CIA in Nicaragua. This amendment would dump the bipartisan support for the peace process that many on both sides tried to achieve. This amendment would put the House on record for more war in Nicaragua on the same day that the Contras and the Sandinistas are talking about peace. This amendment would say no to the Central American peace process and replace an American solution for a Central American solution in the region. It basically would reopen the Contra war because negotiations would most likely break down. It would open the full extent of the CIA contingency funds. Most importantly, though, this amendment would end congressional participation in Contra aid decisions. This amendment is not opportune at this time. If there's continuing stalemate, if there's continuing problems on the part of the Sandinistas that have shown generally not to be supportive of the peace process, then I say perhaps this amendment is opportune later, but now it would be a disaster.
The gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Hyde, has 3 minutes
I yield 1
remaining.
minute to the gentleman from New Hampshire, Mr. Smith.
I thank the gentleman from Illinois for yielding.
Recognized for how much time?
1 minute.
For 1 minute.
Regrettably. My colleague from Oregon indicated in his remarks a short time ago that we on this side view the Contras as the, quote, spiritual descendants of Thomas Jefferson. I agree that it's doubtful that they are the image of Thomas Jefferson, but however, one thing is very certain: Ortega's communist thugs certainly don't resemble Jefferson. The continual stalling of this peace plan starves the Contras, ignores hundreds of millions of Soviet arms to Nicaragua, and slowly chokes to death any hope of freedom in Nicaragua. The opposition looks upon the Contras as less than people. They speak of the Nicaraguan people and the Contras. Time and time again you say it. Support the Hyde Amendment and send a message to Ortega that the United States of America stands, yes, for peace, and also for freedom and democracy. Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding.
Time the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Ohio.
I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Alexander.
Gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Alexander, is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Since I've never spoken on this subject before, I thought I would take the opportunity to express my position. Earlier this week, I had the opportunity to spend about 3 hours with a Nicaraguan who no longer lives in that country, and he told me in confidence, with other government agents that are pursuing his testimony, his evidence, of a meeting he had with former dictator Somoza back in 1980, before the Reagan administration came into power, and of the fact that it was Somoza's idea to establish the Contras. Now, as long as the United States continues to provide money, the ghost of Tacho Somoza will continue to oppress and plague and kill the people of Nicaragua. I urge my colleagues to vote down this amendment, and let's bury Somoza once and for all.
Gentleman from Ohio has 6 minutes remaining, and the gentleman from Illinois has 2. Does the gentleman from Ohio desire to yield additional time?
Okay.
Gentleman, under the rules, is entitled to close debate.
At this time, I yield 2 minutes to Distinguished Majority Leader, Mr. Foley.
Distinguished Majority Leader, Mr. Foley, is recognized for 2 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent to revise and
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Chairman, I think in deciding this issue, members should be very clear what the issue is. The issue is not about sending signals to the negotiations that are going on even at this moment in Managua between the resistance and the Nicaraguan government. The issue is about authorizing the sending of military and paramilitary equipment and authorizations and money effective October 1st to resume the war. That's what it's about, and nobody should be in any doubt about it. It's not about helping the peace process. It's abandoning the peace process and going for rearming the Contras to conduct by military means an effort to overthrow the government of Nicaragua. We've been at this issue since December 1st, 1981, and we're here again debating the same issue. This provision has been, the provision that our friends would like to strike, has been in the law for the last 4 years. But what happens if it is stricken ought to be very clear. At that time, the contingency fund available to the Central Intelligence Agency is available for military or paramilitary operations without other restriction. And also, any uses of funds which might accrue under a finding to the Department of Defense or any other agency is available for military operations in Nicaragua. There is also, as far as I know, no legal restriction on the Department of Defense from making personnel or materials available to the Central Intelligence Agency subsequent to a finding for the purpose of putting American military trainers without limit into the field to conduct transfers of materiel without virtually any legal limit to the democratic resistance, as well as to provide any other implements of war. Now, if you want to do that, this is an opportunity to do it. But there's no legal restriction if this section is removed in doing that effective midnight, September 30th. There will be opportunities if the Congress wants to resume military aid to do that, obviously. This amendment is an example of restoring military aid that's come up on a routine bill in the process of an open rule. But members should consider...
The time the gentleman has expired.
I yield the gentleman one additional minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
But members should ask what they undertake when they do this. It is unreal and unwise to say that all we are doing is balancing the negotiating scales. We are sending a signal that we have lost confidence in the negotiating process between the two parties, even while they have demonstrated that they still have that confidence. It is saying that we are abandoning the peace process, even while the parties are conducting negotiations to continue the peace process. It is saying that we want an administration to be able to send secretly, subject only to the notifications of the law to the relevant committees, but secretly to the rest of the country and the Congress, military and paramilitary aid to the democratic resistance, virtually without limit, other than the total size of the contingency fund and the amount of transfers or reprogramming that the administration might decide to attempt. And to do that at a time when the administration has been, I think, pretty clearly not fully committed to the peace process, and in some respects has indicated its abandonment. If we want to abandon the peace process, this is the time to do it, as far as our friends say, and this is the way to do it, certainly.
Now the gentleman from Illinois.
For the final 2 minutes, I'm pleased to yield to the distinguished gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Bunning, who will discuss this amendment, which doesn't take effect till next October.
Thank the gentleman for yield. Ask for unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks. The time is now. I've been in this Congress for 15 months. This is the 5th time we have had this issue before us. I have voted 4 times on aid, our military assistance, our withholding military assistance from the Contras. The Sandinistas, with the good help of their PR firm in New York, have played our Congress like a drum. They make promises to bring peace and democracy to Nicaragua. Every time they get close, they say, we need more time. We need more time. As soon as they get there, they reject what has been proposed in negotiations. They stonewall peace. They stonewall democracy. It shouldn't surprise us. They've done it all along, and they're doing it to us presently. I thought the Secretary of State, when I was elected to Congress, was the policymaker as far as the United States government was concerned. I got a real education when I came to this Congress. There are 525 Secretaries of State, and they seem to be sitting in this House and on the other side of the aisle, over on the other side of the Capitol. Instead of living up to the promises of meaningful negotiations, they are counting on starving Contras, starving those people that want to fight for their own freedom. I think it's time that the Congress get back to their business and send a message to those people that want to fight for their own freedom that the United States of America stands for freedom, stands for democracy, and we ought to support those people and allow them. I just wish that the Hyde Amendment passed, and I ask for everyone to consider it the only means that we have right now to send a message to those people.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself the balance of the time. Mr. Chairman, I'm concerned about this amendment in a respect that I don't think has been properly addressed here this afternoon. If this amendment is adopted, the funding for the Contras would then be conducted through the Reserve for Contingencies Fund that belongs to the CIA. I think that Mr. Hyde and Mr. Cheney, the authors of the amendment, would agree with me that this is an area in which our committee has oversight function on behalf of the Congress. It is an area that has had some problems in it. But on a bipartisan basis, we've worked together, trying to work out those problems. And to the credit of the